At dawn, before the desert heat begins to shimmer and before the crowds gather along the edge of the Giza Plateau, the Great Sphinx seems less like a monument than a survivor waking from stone. The first light touches the worn human face, slips down the royal headdress, and stretches across the long body of a lion lying low in its carved hollow. Behind it, the pyramids rise with a certainty that almost feels mathematical. They have names, builders, passages, measurements, fragments of royal ambition locked into their angles. The Sphinx is different. It is present, massive, famous beyond almost any statue on earth, and yet it keeps its first secret with astonishing discipline. No ancient Old Kingdom inscription survives beside it, saying, plainly and finally, this king ordered me carved. No foundation text steps forward to end the argument. No clean dedication explains why a lion with a human face was shaped from the limestone of Giza and left to stare eastward across the Egyptian sun. That silence is the beginning of the mystery, not the whole mystery. The Sphinx does not speak in words, but it is not mute. Its evidence is built into the ground around it, the trench cut into the plateau, the layers of limestone running through its body, the temple blocks in front of it, the causeway nearby, the valley temple just beside it, the way stone, architecture, and landscape seem to lock together like the remaining pieces of a damaged but still readable machine. What survives in the record suggests that the answer is not hidden in a single dramatic clue, but scattered across the bedrock itself. To understand the Sphinx, one has to listen to the plateau almost as much as to the statue. The face is what first holds the eye. It is broad, weathered, and strangely calm, though time has taken its sharpness. The nose is gone, the beard is mostly lost, and the surface has suffered from wind, salt, water, repairs, and the hands of many centuries. Even so, there is still a royal presence in it. The head wears the nemes, the striped cloth headdress associated with kingship, and the body is not the body of a human ruler, but of a crouching lion, the ancient emblem of strength, watchfulness, and solar power. In Egyptian imagination, the king stands between human order and divine force. A lion-bodied royal guardian at the edge of a pyramid complex belongs to a world where stone can hold theology, power, geography, and memory in the same shape. Yet the proportions are unsettling. The head seems small compared with the immense body. The neck rises from a chest that has been cut and patched again and again. The flanks are long and low, almost like a geological ridge persuaded into animal form. This strangeness has fed centuries of speculation, and not all of it is careful. Some have imagined that the Sphinx began as something much older, perhaps a natural formation, perhaps a forgotten monument reshaped by later kings. Others have searched its face for the likeness of one pharaoh or another, hoping that bone structure in stone might solve what texts do not. Scholars still debate parts of the problem, and the evidence remains incomplete. But the most reliable path begins with a simpler observation. This creature is not standing apart from Giza. It is embedded in Giza. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The story ahead is not only about a statue, it is about how a civilization carved authority into a landscape, how later ages forgot and rediscovered that meaning, and how modern archaeology tries to read intention from stone when the ancient voice has fallen silent. The Sphinx lies in a hollow, not on an open pedestal. Its body was not assembled from separate blocks like an ordinary building. It was carved from the living limestone of the plateau. Around it, ancient workers cut a U-shaped enclosure, removing stone from the bedrock and leaving the core from which the lion body emerged. This matters because the missing stone did not simply vanish. Some of it appears to have been used nearby, especially in the temple directly in front of the Sphinx. The statue and its temple may have come from the same wound in the earth. The blocks taken from around its body became part of the sacred architecture facing it. If that reconstruction is right, the Sphinx is the center of a quarry temple statue system, a single act of design unfolding in bedrock and masonry. The limestone itself adds another voice. It was formed in ancient seas long before Egypt, when marine sediments settled and hardened into layers of different strength. Some beds are harder and stand proud, others are softer and recede. The body of the Sphinx has weathered unevenly because the stone itself is uneven, creating the rippled, scarred look of the flanks and chest. A viewer who expects polished perfection may see only damage. A geologist sees beds, joints, fossils, weakness, and endurance. An archaeologist sees tool marks, cuttings, repairs, old restorations, and architectural relationships. The human story begins where those records overlap. Imagine the Giza Plateau in the 4th dynasty, not as a silent archaeological park, but as an active royal landscape. The second pyramid is rising or already raised nearby, its casing stones catching the sun. Work gangs move along prepared routes. Stone is dragged, levered, shaped, and set. Officials pass between temples, harbours, workshops, storage areas, and causeways. The Nile's floodplain lies not far away, green and bright against the desert edge. In that setting, the Sphinx is not a lonely riddle. It is part of an enormous statement of royal permanence. Still, permanence is a difficult illusion. The Sphinx has spent much of its life being swallowed by sand. Only the head and upper back were often visible when the desert moved in, turning the body into a buried rumour. Later, Egyptians cleared it, honoured it, renamed it, and placed a stela between its paws. Greek and Roman visitors saw it through their own imaginations. Medieval observers knew it as a terrifying or wondrous presence. Modern excavators uncovered, measured, repaired, photographed, mapped, and scanned it. Each age inherited the same face and asked a slightly different question. Was it a god, a king, a guardian, a relic, an oracle, an engineering marvel, or simply the most famous unfinished sentence in Egyptian stone? The answer, as so often in deep history, is not as clean as curiosity wants it to be. The mainstream case points strongly toward Khafre, the 4th dynasty king whose pyramid, valley temple, causeway, and mortuary landscape surround the Sphinx in ways that are hard to dismiss. But strong evidence is not the same as a surviving signature. That is why the mystery endures. The Sphinx stands at the edge between what archaeology can show and what ancient people did not write down, or wrote on materials that vanished, or placed where time has not allowed them to survive. Its silence is not empty. It is dense with clues. As the sun climbs higher over Giza, the face changes. Shadows withdraw from the eyes. The lion body becomes less ghostly and more geological. The ancient guardian does not need to be older than Egypt, or the work of a vanished super-civilization, to be mysterious. It is mysterious because it belongs to one of the best-known landscapes on Earth, and still refuses to give us the one sentence we most desire. Who built it? The old texts do not say, but the stone, the temples, the terrain, and the instruments of modern survey are beginning to tell a slower, more patient story. For most of its long life, the Great Sphinx has not looked the way it looks today. The familiar image of the full lion body stretched across the limestone floor is, in historical terms, almost recent. For centuries at a time, the desert took the monument back. Sand gathered in the carved enclosure, rose against the paws, climbed the chest, swallowed the flanks, and left only the head and upper back exposed to the open air. To anyone approaching Giza in one of those buried centuries, the Sphinx was not a complete creature at all. It was a colossal face emerging from the earth, a head without an obvious body, a royal ghost staring out of a dune. That image may be even stranger than the cleaned monument known today, because it turns the Sphinx from a sculpted guardian into a question half visible above the surface of the world. Sand burial is not a small detail in its story. It is one of the reasons the Sphinx survived, one of the reasons it decayed, and one of the reasons its meaning changed. The same sand that hid the body also protected parts of it from the harshest wind. The exposed head, carved from harder stone, endured in a different way from the softer body beneath. The buried portions escaped some erosion but suffered from moisture, salts, cracking, and the repeated stress of clearance and repair. The monument has never simply stood in time. It has moved through cycles of exposure and concealment. Each clearance has revealed the Sphinx again, but never exactly as it was before. In the Old Kingdom, the Sphinx likely belonged to a carefully arranged sacred and royal landscape. Its body, temple, and neighbouring buildings were meant to be seen in relation to one another. The eastern gaze, the nearby causeway, the relationship to the pyramid complex, and the ritual spaces before it all suggest a monument designed to operate within a larger system. But the desert does not respect design forever. After the great age of pyramid building fades, maintenance weakens. Political centres shift. Priests, workers, and officials who once understood the whole arrangement are replaced by later generations who inherit monuments already ancient. The Sphinx begins its second life not as a newly carved royal symbol, but as an object of memory. That transformation is important. A monument may be built with one intention, then survive long enough to be given another. Later Egyptians did not necessarily know everything the original builders knew. They could see that the Sphinx was ancient, powerful, and sacred. But the exact details of its creation may already have been blurred. When they cleared sand from around it, restored parts of it, and honoured it under new religious meanings, they were not merely preserving the past. They were interpreting it. What survives in the record suggests that the Sphinx became a place where later kings could attach themselves to deep antiquity, drawing authority from a stone presence that seemed older than memory. The most famous ancient episode of rediscovery comes much later than the Fourth Dynasty, during the New Kingdom, when the Sphinx was already a monument of the distant past. A royal stela placed between its paws tells of a prince who encounters the buried guardian and receives a promise of kingship if he clears the sand. That story belongs more fully to a later part of the Sphinx's biography, but its existence reveals something crucial even here by that time. The Sphinx was already partly lost and already capable of being found again. Its burial was not a modern accident. It was an ancient condition. The desert had made rediscovery part of the monument's identity. Over time, the name and nature of the Sphinx shifted. Egyptians of later periods associated it with solar and royal divinities. Greek-speaking visitors eventually used the word Sphinx, linking it to their own mythic vocabulary, though the Egyptian monument is not simply the same creature as the Greek riddle monster. Medieval observers knew it through other names and stories, sometimes with awe, sometimes with suspicion. For travellers crossing the plateau in later ages, the face was often the main visible feature, And that visibility encouraged the imagination to do what imagination often does around ruins. It filled the missing body with rumour. A giant head in the sand invites stories more readily than a measured archaeological plan. The evidence remains incomplete for many phases of this long afterlife. Some repairs can be studied in stone. Some clearances are known from inscriptions, travellers' accounts, sketches, and excavation records. Other episodes must be inferred from sediment, masonry, and the condition of the monument itself. The Sphinx was not uncovered once and then left open forever. It was repeatedly touched, patched, buried, and touched again. Ancient restorers added masonry to weakened areas. Later workers stabilized sections. Different hands used different stone and different techniques, creating a layered body in which Old Kingdom carving, New Kingdom attention, later ancient repair, and modern conservation all occupy the same creature. By the early modern period, the Sphinx had become one of the most haunting images of Egypt for outsiders, but knowledge of it was still fragmentary. Drawings and descriptions circulated through Europe, often mixing observation with fantasy. The buried state of the monument made it difficult to understand its full shape. Some artists showed the head with exaggerated features. Some travellers misunderstood the scale of what lay beneath. The desert was not only covering stone, it was distorting knowledge. A buried monument produces partial facts, and partial facts are fertile ground for confident mistakes. In the 19th century, clearance began to turn curiosity into excavation. Workers cut into the sand around the head and chest, exposing more of the monument and revealing that the isolated face belonged to a massive lion body. This was not a smooth process of scientific discovery in the modern sense. Early excavations were often uneven, driven by ambition, fascination, imperial collecting, and the emerging discipline of Egyptology all at once. Still, they changed the Sphinx permanently. More of the enclosure came into view. The scale of the pores, chest, and surrounding architecture could be appreciated again. The monument began to return from legend to landscape. The full clearing of the Sphinx enclosure in the 20th century made the statue look complete to the modern eye, but that completeness can be misleading. What appears now as a stable monument is the result of enormous intervention. Sand was removed, debris was cleared, repair blocks were studied, replaced, or added. Drainage and weathering problems became urgent. Once exposed, the Sphinx was no longer protected by the same burial that had hidden it. Visibility came with vulnerability. The world could finally see the lion body, but the stone body now had to endure the world. This pattern gives the Sphinx one of its deepest ironies. People often imagine archaeology as the act of rescuing ancient things from oblivion, and in one sense that is true, but excavation also changes the conditions of survival. A monument buried in sand is hidden from sight but partly shielded from air, temperature shifts, and human pressure. A monument uncovered becomes available to knowledge, tourism, conservation, and damage. The Sphinx has passed between estates again and again. Never fully lost, never fully safe. By the time modern researchers arrive with mapping tools, geological surveys, conservation records, and ground-penetrating radar, they inherit not a pristine Old Kingdom statue, but a long biography of burial and return. The Sphinx is not only what Khafre's age may have carved, it is also what later Egyptians revered, what desert winds exposed and concealed, what excavators uncovered, what restorers patched, and what modern science tries to read through layers of disturbance. To ask who built it, one must first understand that the thing being asked about has changed through time. The ancient guardian has been buried, awakened, altered, and questioned for nearly its entire existence. And that is why the half-buried Sphinx matters so much to the larger mystery. The missing inscription may never appear, the original dedication may be gone for good, but the repeated rediscovery of the monument has left another kind of record sand lines, repair phases, excavation cuts, weathered stone, and the memory of a statue that was never just seen once and understood forever. The Sphinx enters history not as a single clear announcement, but as a face rising again and again from the desert, each time offering a little more of itself, and each time keeping something back. To see the Sphinx clearly, one has to make the modern plateau disappear. The buses, fences, camera lines, paved approaches, and distant city noise have to fall away, because the world that produced the Guardian was not a museum landscape, but a working edge between river and desert. In the 4th dynasty, Giza is a place of movement. The Nile floodplain lies below, green with fields, canals, harbours, and seasonal routes of transport. While the plateau rises above it as a desert stage prepared for royal eternity, stone is everywhere, but it is not silent stone. It is being cut, dragged, measured, dressed, stacked, polished, and fitted into a political and sacred geography whose scale is difficult to grasp even now. The pyramid builders did not arrive at Giza as wandering dreamers staring at a blank desert. They came from a state already capable of organising labour, food, copper tools, boats, ropes, sledges, officials, surveyors, scribes, priests, and skilled crews across years of work. The old image of masses forced blindly under the lash does not account well for the archaeological evidence of planned workers' settlements, bakeries, galleries, animal bones, administrative marks, and rotating labour groups. This was hard labour, certainly, but it was also organised labour within a royal economy. What survives in the record suggests a vast system of provisioning grain made into bread, beer brewed in quantity, animals processed for rations, tools repaired, crews named, assignments tracked, and limestone blocks moved according to rhythms set by the river, season, and king's command. The king stood at the centre of that system, but not merely as a human ruler with expensive tastes in stone. In Old Kingdom Egypt, kingship was cosmic. The pharaoh's body was mortal, but his office belonged to the maintenance of order against chaos, to the cycle of sunrise and sunset, to the connection between earth and sky. A pyramid was not only a tomb, it was a machine of transformation, a mountain of stone designed to carry royal power beyond death and keep it bound to the gods. Around it stood temples, courts, offering places, causeways, harbours, storage zones, and ritual routes. Offerings had to be presented, and priests had to maintain the relationship between the living kingdom and the royal presence beyond life. From this perspective, the Giza Plateau becomes less a cemetery than a royal landscape in motion. The pyramids dominate the horizon, but the lower structures are just as important for understanding how the place worked. A valley temple near the edge of cultivation could receive the king's body and ritual attention from the river world. A causeway could lead upward from the valley edge toward the mortuary temple and the pyramid. The passage between those points was not only practical, it was symbolic, moving from the living valley to the desert domain of eternity. The Sphinx, lying near this transition zone, belongs to the same language of stone thresholds, even if the exact words once attached to it are lost. The environment sharpened that language. Egypt's ancient life depended on the Nile, but its afterlife imagination looked strongly toward the desert margins, where dry ground preserved bodies and where the western horizon marked the sinking sun. At Giza, the contrast is especially powerful. One side offers water, crops, villages, and administration. The other offers bare limestone, heat, light, silence, and distance. A monument carved directly from the plateau is not merely placed in the landscape. It is made of the landscape. It emerges from a quarry cut into living bedrock, turning geology into royal image. The work required to create that landscape was not only brute force, it demanded close knowledge of stone. Giza limestone occurs in beds of different quality, and the builders had to understand how to exploit those beds for blocks, walls, cores, casings, and carvings. Some limestone could be used for local masonry. Finer stone could be brought from Tura across the river for shining outer casing. Granite had to come from far to the south, a reminder that a monument at Giza could contain the labour of distant regions. Copper tools, stone pounders, wooden levers, ropes, mud, water, sledges, ramps, and human coordination form the technology of colossal building. None of this required lost machines. That may sound less romantic than hidden technology, but it is more impressive. A single block is a problem of weight. A pyramid complex is a problem of society. Someone has to quarry stone without collapsing the working face. Someone has to move it without losing control on uneven ground. Someone has to feed the haulers, replace broken tools, mark destinations, correct alignments, time deliveries, and keep rituals moving while the monument is still incomplete. The Sphinx, if carved as part of this same building world, belongs to a culture already expert at turning logistical pressure into sacred architecture. No single explanation fully accounts for every surviving feature, but the wider Old Kingdom context makes a colossal limestone guardian at Giza not an impossibility, but a natural expression of the age's ambitions. There is also a human texture behind the stone, though it should not be imagined too sentimentally. The workers at Giza were not anonymous in their own lives, even if most names have vanished. Some belonged to rotating crews with proud labels. Some were specialists who shaped stone surfaces, set masonry, mixed gypsum mortar, or handled boats and sledges. Some prepared food, kept accounts, maintained tools, or served temple spaces. The building site would have had dust, noise, animal smells, cooking smoke, wet clay, sun glare, and the constant scrape of stone against stone. A royal project of this scale was never only construction. Ritual and engineering were intertwined from the beginning. The priests and officials who moved through this world would have understood forms differently from modern viewers. A lion body was not simply an animal body. A royal head was not simply a portrait. The horizon was not simply where the sun happened to rise. Egyptian symbols worked by compression. A single form could hold strength, kingship, solar renewal, guardianship, and sacred geography together. The Sphinx's eastward orientation would have mattered in a world attentive to the sun's daily return. Its position near temples and approach routes would have mattered in a landscape designed to guide bodies, offerings, and meanings through space. Scholars still debate how fully the Sphinx Temple was completed or used, and the evidence remains incomplete. But its presence before the statue points toward ritual intention rather than casual sculpture. Even the silence of the Old Kingdom text looks different inside this world. The absence of a surviving inscription naming the Sphinx's builder is frustrating, but not unnatural. Many ancient intentions were never carved where modern researchers want them. Some records were written on perishable materials. Some rituals were known through practice rather than monumental explanation. Some meanings were so embedded in the arrangement of buildings and routes that no one needed to state them in the blunt language of a museum label. Ancient architecture often assumed an audience trained to read space, orientation, and symbol. So the Sphinx begins to appear not as an isolated riddle, but as a creature born from a particular moment in Egyptian history, when kings could command enormous resources, when theology and engineering reinforced each other, and when the desert edge became a canvas for royal transformation. Its mystery remains, but it is no longer floating in emptiness. Around it are quarries, temples, causeways, settlements, work crews, rituals, and a civilization confident enough to carve a guardian from the earth and place it before the rising sun. The next clues lie in the body itself, because the Sphinx's meaning is not only around it, it is written into the strange union of stone, lion, and human face. The body of the Sphinx is the first clue that the monument is not merely a statue enlarged to impossible scale, but a negotiation with the bedrock itself. From a distance, the lion form looks smooth and deliberate, stretched along the floor of its enclosure with front paws extended and haunches folded behind. Up close, it becomes more complicated. The surface is not one continuous skin of perfect stone. It is layered, scarred, repaired, softened, and interrupted by the natural bands of limestone from which it was carved. Some parts project with stubborn strength, others have withdrawn into hollows and channels. The Sphinx is both sculpture and exposed geology, and that double nature explains much of its power. It seems alive because it has a body, but it seems ancient beyond ordinary art because the body is also a piece of the plateau. The limestone beds running through the monument are unequal. Harder layers preserve shape better, while softer layers weather faster, leaving the torso with deep undulations and a strangely ribbed appearance. This unevenness has encouraged many interpretations, some careful and some imaginative. It is easy to stand before the worn flanks and feel that they must record an extreme history of rain, wind, sand, salt, water, repairs, or all of these working together. Scholars still debate the precise balance of those forces, especially when trying to separate natural weathering from human modification and later restoration. But the basic fact is clear enough: the Sphinx is carved from stone that does not age evenly. Its body is not a neutral surface. It is a layered document. The head, by contrast, appears to have survived in better condition, partly because it was carved from a stronger limestone bed. This difference may help explain why the head could remain visible above the sand for long periods, while the body below was buried, damaged, and patched. Yet the head also creates one of the monument's most enduring puzzles. It seems proportionally small compared with a great lion body, especially when viewed from the side. Some have taken this as evidence that the head was recarved from an earlier form, perhaps from a larger animal head or a natural outcrop. Others argue that the proportions may result from the limitations of the stone mass available, the height of the bedrock, later erosion, or the visual requirements of the monument within its enclosure. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for every impression the statue gives from every angle. What survives of the face still carries the signs of kingship. The Nemes headdress frames the head, descending at the sides in the familiar royal form seen in many images of Egyptian pharaohs. The forehead would once have carried a uraeus, the rearing cobra symbol of divine royal power, though it is now lost. The chin once supported a ceremonial beard, fragments of which were found in the modern era. Though whether all beard elements belong to the original carving or later restoration has been debated, The eyes, lips, and cheek planes are worn, but they retain enough structure to suggest that this was never meant as a generic human face. It was a royal face. Whether or not it can be matched beyond doubt to one named King, the missing nose has become almost a story of its own. Popular legend long blamed Napoleon's soldiers for shooting it away, but that explanation does not fit the evidence, since images and accounts indicate the damage existed before Napoleon's Egyptian campaign. The more plausible view is that the nose was deliberately damaged at some earlier point, though the exact circumstances remain uncertain. The loss changes the face dramatically. A nose gives direction and personality. Without it, the Sphinx becomes more abstract, more mask-like, and perhaps more haunting. The damage invites projection. People search the remaining planes for identity, comparing them with statues of Khafre, Khufu, Jedefre, or other royal images, hoping the surviving geometry will name the builder. But portraits in ancient Egyptian royal art are not simple photographs in stone. They combine likeness, ideal, office, and divine symbolism. A worn face cannot easily serve as a courtroom witness. The lion body is just as important as the human head. In Egyptian thought, lions belong to heat, strength, horizons, and guardianship. They are dangerous animals, but also solar animals associated with the blazing edges of the day. A lion lying at the threshold of a royal pyramid landscape is not decorative in the modern sense. It announces protection and power. The Sphinx's posture is not the posture of a leaping predator or a raging beast. It is watchful, controlled, monumental. The force is contained. That is precisely the kind of image Old Kingdom kingship often sought, not chaos, but mastered power. Not wildness alone, but wildness brought into royal order. The fusion of human and lion may seem strange now because modern viewers separate portrait, animal form, religious symbol, and political monument into different categories. Ancient Egyptian art often did not. A king could be shown as a human ruler, a falcon-protected figure, a bull trampling enemies, a sphinx, a solar child, or a divine companion, depending on context. The form did not erase the king's identity, it expanded it. In this sense, the Sphinx may represent royal authority made landscape scale, a king transformed into a guardian creature whose body belongs to the desert and whose face belongs to the human world of rule. It is not simply a statue of a lion with a man's head. It is an argument in stone about what a king is. The front paws, now heavily restored, stretch eastward into the light. Between them later Egyptians placed the dream stealer, proving that the space was meaningful long after the monument's creation. The chest rises behind them, worn and patched. The shoulders broaden into the long back. The tail curls along the side, a small detail easily missed beside the drama of the face. The rear of the monument is less visually commanding than the front. But it matters because it shows the practical problem of turning a natural limestone mass into an animal body. The sculptors were not free to invent without constraint. They had to work with what the plateau gave them, cutting away enough stone to create form while leaving enough to hold the statue together. This makes the Sphinx different from many other royal images. A portable statue can be abandoned, moved, broken, or reburied in a temple cache. A relief can be recut on a wall. The Sphinx is fixed to the earth. Its identity is inseparable from the place where it was carved. That fixedness strengthens the mainstream argument that its meaning must be read through the surrounding Giza complex, not through the face alone. A face can be argued over endlessly. A face can lose its nose, beard, surface. and fine detail, but the body, the enclosure, the nearby temples, and the cut bedrock still preserve relationships too large to be accidental. The anatomy of the Sphinx therefore offers both clue and caution. It tells us that the builders were working with natural limestone layers, royal symbolism, animal power, and a specific sacred landscape. It also warns us that time can distort proportion, erase detail, and make damage look like intention. The Guardian's body has been repaired so often that it is no longer possible to see every original surface clearly. The head has been weathered enough that identity becomes a matter of probability rather than certainty, and yet, even in that damaged state, the design still holds. A human face rises from a lion body carved from living rock, staring east across a royal horizon. The question of who built it remains open enough to tempt argument, but the form itself says what kind of world could have imagined it a world where kingship, sunlight, stone, and animal force could be fused into one silent watcher at the edge of eternity. Khafre enters the story not as a convenient name placed on a mystery, but as a shadow cast by the whole arrangement of the plateau. His pyramid rises behind and above the Sphinx, the second Great Pyramid of Giza, set slightly higher in the desert so that it can seem almost equal to Khufu's larger monument when seen from certain angles. His mortuary complex stretches from the pyramid down toward the valley edge, linked by a causeway that passes close to the Sphinx enclosure. Beside the Sphinx stands Khafre's Valley Temple, built with massive limestone core blocks and sheathed in harder, more precious stone. In front of the Sphinx lies the Sphinx Temple, ruined now, but still readable enough to matter. The Sphinx is not simply near Khafre's world, it is woven into the lower end of it. This is where the strongest mainstream argument begins. If a viewer looks only at the face, Khafre's identity can feel uncertain. If a viewer looks only for an inscription, the case becomes frustrating. But if the whole built landscape is examined, the pattern grows harder to ignore. The Sphinx sits immediately beside the lower portion of Khafre's causeway. Its temple stands next to Khafre's Valley Temple. The arrangement suggests a planned architectural zone, not a random monument later surrounded by unrelated buildings. The Sphinx faces east, toward the rising sun and the valley, while Khafre's pyramid complex climbs westward and upward behind it. This is royal geography, arranged in stone, light, and movement. The Valley Temple is essential to this clue. It is one of the most impressive surviving structures of Old Kingdom Egypt, severe and powerful, with enormous blocks forming its core. Later casing and interior elements gave it a more polished finish. But the underlying mass of the building belongs to the same appetite for megalithic construction seen around the Sphinx. For a long time, the relationship between the Valley Temple, the Sphinx Temple, and the Sphinx itself invited comparison. But modern mapping sharpened the point. When researchers studied the geological layers inside the blocks of the Sphinx Temple, they found that many of those blocks matched the beds running through the Sphinx and its surrounding ditch. The implication is striking stone removed from around the Sphinx was used to build the temple in front of it. That does not sound dramatic in the way hidden chambers or lost civilizations sound dramatic, but it is exactly the kind of clue archaeology trusts. Stone can keep a memory of where it came from. A limestone block cut from a layered bed can carry those layers like a fingerprint. If several large temple blocks contain the same sequence of harder and softer beds visible in the Sphinx body and enclosure, then the temple and statue are not merely neighbours. They are parts of the same operation. Workers quarried the U-shaped ditch, left the central mass that became the lion body, and drag the removed blocks eastward into temple walls. The guardian and its temple were born from the same cutting of the plateau. This matters for Khafre because the Sphinx Temple does not stand alone. Its plan, position, and construction sequence are linked to the Valley Temple beside it, and the Valley Temple belongs to Khafre's pyramid complex. The most cautious version of the argument is not that every detail is absolutely solved, but that the combined evidence points strongly toward Khafre's reign as the moment when the Sphinx was carved and its associated temples were built. Scholars still debate parts of this reconstruction, and the evidence remains incomplete, but the alignment of stone source, temple placement, and royal complex makes Khafre the leading candidate by a wide margin. There is also the face. Many have compared the Sphinx's surviving features with statues attributed to Khafre, especially the famous seated statue of the king protected by the falcon of Horus. The resemblance is not proof in the strictest sense, because royal Egyptian portraits were idealized, and the Sphinx's face is badly damaged. The missing nose, eroded surfaces, lost details, and possible later repairs make precise identification hazardous. Yet the comparison has weight when placed beside the architectural evidence. A royal face carved beside Khafre's causeway, next to Khafre's Valley Temple, in a quarry temple sequence tied to that lower complex, does not need the face alone to carry the case. The face supports a larger pattern. Khafre's reign also fits the symbolic logic. The Fourth Dynasty is the great age of pyramid power, when royal authority becomes almost geological in scale. Khufu had built the Great Pyramid, an achievement so enormous that it may have reshaped everything that followed at Giza. Khafre inherited not only a throne, but a landscape already dominated by his predecessor's stone mountain. His answer was not merely to build another pyramid, it was to create a complex in which approach, Valley Temple, causeway, mortuary temple, pyramid, and possibly the Sphinx formed a connected statement of kingship. A lion-bodied guardian with the king's image could stand at the threshold of that complex as a living symbol of controlled force, solar renewal, and royal presence. The Sphinx's position at the lower end of the pyramid landscape may have been especially meaningful. Anyone moving from the valley side toward the pyramid would enter a zone where the desert, the sun, and the king's eternal architecture came together. The Sphinx, facing the dawn, would not have been a background ornament. It would have occupied the sacred approach. Its body carved from the plateau made the king's power seem native to the earth itself, as though the desert had yielded a royal guardian from within its own bones. What survives in the record suggests that the Old Kingdom builders were not only constructing buildings, but shaping a ceremonial topography. The Sphinx Temple strengthens this impression. It was built directly in front of the statue, using enormous limestone core blocks, some of which appear to have come from the Sphinx ditch. Its layout and relation to the Valley Temple suggest that ritual space once existed before the lion's paws, though the temple was left unfinished or at least not completed in the way its builders may have intended. This unfinished quality is not a weakness in the argument. In some ways, it makes the scene more human. Even the age of pyramid builders had limits. A royal project could change direction, lose momentum, or stop before the last casing stones were set. The Sphinx may preserve not only a triumph, but a moment when ambition exceeded the time available to finish every surface. There are smaller clues in the stoneworking itself: lever sockets, quarry cuts, unfinished masses of bedrock, and the relationship between extracted blocks and remaining sculpture all point toward a working sequence rather than an isolated artistic act. The Sphinx began as a mass left in a quarry, but not by accident. Workers cut around it, exploited the beds, removed stone for construction, and gradually revealed the lion form. The monument is therefore not simply carved. It is excavated from its own quarry. Its temple is built from the absence created around it. That is one of the most elegant and surprising details in the whole story. The space that makes the Sphinx visible may also have supplied the stone for the building that honoured it. The Khafre case, then, is cumulative. No single clue carries all the weight. The face is suggestive but damaged. The nearby pyramid is important but not enough on its own. The causeway shows relationship but not authorship by itself. The temples provide stronger architectural context. The geological match between the Sphinx ditch and temple blocks gives the argument its hardest edge. Together, they create a chain of probability that is difficult to break. The Sphinx appears to belong to Khafre's lower complex, to the same construction world, and likely to the same reign. Still, the mystery does not vanish. Archaeology often works by convergence rather than confession. It gathers lines of evidence until one explanation becomes the most coherent, while leaving space for what cannot be recovered. Khafre's shadow falls across the Sphinx because the landscape points toward him. The stone points toward him. The temples and causeway point toward him. But the ancient guardian does not give up the simplicity of a signed name. It offers something more patient and more demanding, a case built from the ground itself, where the king is not announced in a sentence, but inferred from the way an entire sacred landscape was carved, quarried, and arranged beneath the Egyptian sun. The most stubborn fact in the Sphinx mystery is not a strange tunnel, a damaged face, or a pattern of erosion on the stone. It is an absence. No surviving Old Kingdom inscription beside the monument says that Khafre built it. No carved foundation text explains the project. No dedicatory line announces the king, the date, the crew, or the ritual name of the guardian in the plain way modern curiosity would prefer. In a landscape where so much stone was shaped with intention, the silence feels almost deliberate, though it may be nothing more mysterious than the ordinary cruelty of time. The Sphinx may once have had records on walls now lost, on wooden tablets long decayed, in administrative papyri that vanished, or in temple spaces later damaged beyond recovery. What survives in the record suggests a strong context, but not a signed confession. This missing inscription problem is the narrow doorway through which many arguments enter. It does not destroy the Khafre case, but it prevents it from becoming absolute. Archaeology often lives in that difficult space between high probability and final proof. The Pyramid of Khafre has a clear place in royal history. His valley temple and mortuary landscape can be studied through architecture. The Sphinx sits in relation to those features with a force that is hard to dismiss. Yet when the question is reduced to one sharp sentence, who ordered the Sphinx carved, the stone refuses to answer in writing. That refusal gives the monument its peculiar power. The Sphinx is surrounded by evidence and still not fully named. One reason this silence matters so much is that ancient Egyptian monuments often do name kings, royal cartouches, offering scenes, titulary, reliefs, statues, and inscriptions can tie buildings to rulers with great confidence. A king's name was not merely an administrative label, it was part of how his presence endured. To carve the royal name into stone was to bind authority to memory. So when a monument as enormous as the Sphinx lacks a surviving original inscription naming its builder, the absence feels heavier than it might in another culture. It seems to violate expectations. Surely, one thinks, a king who could command a lion-bodied guardian at the foot of his pyramid would want his name attached to it. But ancient survival is uneven. The record is not a complete archive. It is a ruin of an archive. The problem becomes more complicated because later Egyptians did write about the Sphinx, but not in the way that solves its origin. The New Kingdom dream stealer between the paws gives the monument a later religious identity and connects it with royal destiny. But it was set up more than 1,000 years after the likely time of carving. It does not preserve a simple 4th dynasty building inscription. It remembers the Sphinx as an already ancient sacred presence, partly buried in sand, powerful enough to speak through mythic kingship. Later attention confirms the monument's importance, but it also shows how much time had passed. By the New Kingdom, the original context may already have been blurred, reinterpreted, or wrapped in sacred memory. This is one of the quiet traps in studying ancient monuments. Later sources can preserve genuine older traditions, but they can also reshape them. A New Kingdom king restoring an Old Kingdom monument might understand part of its significance, misunderstand another part, and add his own ideology to the whole. The dream stealer is valuable not because it tells us exactly who carved the Sphinx, but because it reveals that later Egyptians saw the buried guardian as a living divine force tied to kingship and the sun. It shows the Sphinx's afterlife, not necessarily its birth certificate. The evidence remains incomplete, and that distinction matters. The same caution applies to names. The word now used around the world, Sphinx, comes through Greek tradition and later usage, not from the original Old Kingdom label of the monument. Ancient Egyptian names associated with the Sphinx in later periods point toward forms of Horus, horizon imagery, and solar kingship, but they do not necessarily preserve what the builders called it at the moment of carving. The name we use is therefore already a layer of interpretation. It is convenient, famous, and unavoidable, but it carries the monument through foreign mythic language. The Egyptian guardian of Giza is not simply the Greek Sphinx transplanted into the desert. It belongs to a different symbolic world. Because the inscription is missing, some scholars and writers have looked elsewhere for authorship. The most common alternative candidates are Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid, and Djedefre, Khufu's son and Khafre's predecessor. These proposals are not all equal, and they should not be treated like wild fantasy. They arise from real questions about sequence, family politics, royal imagery, and the arrangement of the plateau. Khufu's monument dominates Giza, and it is reasonable to ask whether an enormous guardian near the lower landscape might somehow relate to his pyramid rather than Khafre's. Djedefre is especially interesting because he seems to have played an important role in developing solar royal ideology, and some have suggested he may have created the Sphinx in honor of his father Khufu, perhaps explaining why the face need not be Khafre's at all. These ideas show why the missing inscription matters. If the Sphinx carried a clear 4th dynasty cartouche, the debate would be narrower. Without one, the surrounding context must do the work. The Khufu and Djedefre arguments draw attention to details that deserve consideration, especially the possibility that royal projects at Giza were not always neatly separated by modern labels. A plateau could preserve the ambitions of a dynasty, not just one reign, family memory, succession. Solar theology and political display could overlap. No single explanation fully accounts for every uncertainty in the record, and good archaeology has to allow questions before closing them too quickly. Still, alternatives must be weighed against the physical relationships on the ground. The Sphinx is not equally connected to every 4th dynasty monument. It is most directly tied to the lower complex associated with Khafre the Causeway, the Valley Temple, the Sphinx Temple, and the quarrying sequence around the enclosure. The case for Khufu or Djedefre has to explain why the Sphinx and its temple appear so deeply integrated with Khafre's architectural zone. That does not make alternative proposals impossible, but it raises the burden of proof. A theory built mainly from stylistic comparison or dynastic possibility has to contend with the harder evidence of stone, position, and construction sequence. The missing inscription also invites a more subtle question. Perhaps the builders did not need to label the Sphinx in the way we expect, because its meaning was obvious within its landscape. If the monument functioned as part of Khafre's lower complex, then the approach route, temples, and pyramid may have identified it through context. Ancient visitors trained in the rituals of the place would not have needed a sign saying whose guardian this was. The whole sacred route may have answered that. Modern viewers, removed from the living cult and the administrative world that sustained it, ask the stone to do a different kind of work. We want the Sphinx to explain itself in isolation. The ancient builders may never have imagined it would have to. There is another possibility, less satisfying but likely in many ancient problems. The inscription once existed and is simply gone. The Sphinx Temple is badly ruined, its casing, floors, statues, and possible decoration have suffered enormously. If there were inscriptions on elements now lost or never finished, they could have disappeared without leaving enough trace. The same is true of papyrus archives or wooden records associated with construction. Egypt preserves much, but not everything. The Old Kingdom is not a complete library waiting to be read. It is a broken field of surviving stone, disturbed tombs, scattered names, later memories, and the occasional administrative document that escaped destruction by chance. This is why modern research has shifted so much attention to non-textual evidence. When writing is absent, archaeology listens to masonry. It studies the angle of walls, the source of blocks, the sequence of quarry cuts, the alignment of causeways, the weathering of surfaces, the stratigraphy of debris, the layout of temples, and the relationship between monuments. In the case of the Sphinx, these mute forms may be more reliable than a late legend or an attractive face comparison. They are difficult, technical, and sometimes less emotionally satisfying than a royal inscription, but they are the evidence that remains closest to the act of building. The Sphinx therefore teaches a wider lesson about ancient history. The past is not always hidden because someone concealed it. Sometimes it is hidden because the most useful sentence was never preserved. The absence then becomes a vacuum, and into that vacuum flow careful hypotheses, reasonable doubts, outdated theories, popular fantasies, and modern desires for a revelation. The responsible task is not to pretend the vacuum does not exist, nor to fill it with unsupported certainty. It is to ask which explanation best fits the surviving evidence while admitting where the record fails. So the missing inscription does not leave the Sphinx without a story. It forces the story to be built differently. Instead of beginning with a royal name carved in a cartouche, the investigation begins with the hollow cut into the plateau, the blocks of the Sphinx Temple, the nearby Valley Temple, the path of Khafre's causeway, and the way the guardian faces the eastern light. The silence remains at the centre, but around it the stones gather. They do not shout. They do not give the clean answer curiosity wants. They speak slowly, through relationships, damage, and design. And in that slow speech, Khafre's shadow remains the strongest presence, even as the Sphinx keeps its original inscription, if it ever had one, lost somewhere beyond recovery. The Sphinx was not built upward in the ordinary sense. It did not begin as a pile of blocks rising course by course, each stone lifted into place until a form appeared against the sky. It began as a mass that was already there, part of the plateau itself, waiting inside the limestone ridge. the ancient workers did not bring the lion to Giza. They cut away everything that was not the lion, and in that act the monument emerged from a quarry floor like a creature released from geological sleep. This is one of the most important details in understanding its making. The Sphinx is not only a sculpture, it is the remnant of a subtraction. The process would have started with the stone and the site. The workers had to recognize that a natural limestone outcrop near the lower part of the royal complex could be shaped into a colossal guardian. That decision may have been practical, symbolic, or both. A protruding ridge provided the raw mass. The surrounding bedrock could be quarried for temple blocks. The final image would appear inseparable from the land, as if royal power had risen from the desert itself. Scholars still debate how much of the original shape may have been suggested by natural topography, but the finished monument required deliberate human planning on a grand scale. A possible natural beginning does not remove the labour. It makes the labour more interesting. The first great task was to cut the enclosure. Workers carved a broad U-shaped ditch around the mass that would become the body, removing limestone in huge quantities. They had no steel, no explosives, no cranes in the modern sense. Their toolkit was simpler but not primitive. Copper chisels and adzes could shape softer limestone, though they dulled quickly and had to be sharpened again and again. Stone pounders could bruise and break rough surfaces. Wooden levers could pry blocks loose. Ropes, sledges, prepared tracks, mud, and water could help move heavy stones across short distances. The work depended less on one miraculous device than on repeated action, organized crews, and intimate knowledge of how stone fails. Traces of that work are still part of the story. In the floor and sides of the Sphinx area, researchers have identified cuttings and lever sockets, small but revealing marks where ancient workers could insert wooden beams to separate blocks from the bedrock. Such details are easily overlooked beside the huge face and body, but they bring the monument back down to human scale. A lever socket is not majestic. It is a scar of labour. It records a moment when someone needed mechanical advantage, when stone resisted, when a block had to be loosened without ruining the shape being left behind. The Sphinx may be enormous, but it was made through thousands of small decisions like that. As the ditch deepened, the future body stood higher above the surrounding floor. The workers then had to shape the mass left in the centre. The back, flanks, chest, paws, shoulders, and haunches were not equally easy to carve, because the limestone beds changed character from one level to another. Harder layers preserved edges, softer layers crumbled or weathered back. The sculptors could not simply impose an ideal lion on neutral material, they had to compromise with geology. The body we see, long and low, may partly reflect the dimensions of the remaining outcrop and the strength of the beds within it. Art and engineering met in the same cut. The head required a different kind of precision. It rose from a higher, harder part of the limestone, which may explain why it survived better than the lower body. Carving a royal face at that scale demanded control over proportion, symmetry, and frontal presence, even if the result was meant to be seen from specific approaches rather than from every modern camera angle. The sculptors had to create the headdress, face, ears, and neck, while leaving enough mass to support the form. They also had to work within the available height of the outcrop. The head's smaller proportion, so often noticed today, may be partly a consequence of that limitation. The evidence remains incomplete, but it is easier to understand the odd proportions when the Sphinx is treated as bedrock sculpture, rather than a freestanding statue planned without constraint. Meanwhile, the stone removed from around the body became useful. Large blocks quarried from the enclosure appear to have been dragged and set into the Sphinx Temple in front of the statue. This creates a remarkably elegant construction sequence. The workers carve the ditch, freeing the lion shape. The extracted stone becomes architecture. The temple rises before the guardian from the material taken away to reveal it. In that sense, the Sphinx and its temple are not separate projects placed side by side. They are two results of the same quarrying event, one formed by what remained, the other formed by what was removed. Moving those blocks would have been slow, heavy, and difficult in the ordinary way large construction is difficult, without needing to imagine anything supernatural. Some blocks in the nearby temples are immense, and their handling required careful coordination. Crews would have prepared routes, levelled surfaces, applied water or mud to reduce friction, used ropes and wooden sledges, and relied on supervisors who understood timing and force. The ancient Egyptians had already developed sophisticated methods for moving large stone by the 4th dynasty. The surprise is not that they could move the blocks. The surprise is how confidently they integrated quarrying, sculpture, and temple building into one planned landscape. Finishing the Sphinx would have involved more than rough shaping. Surfaces had to be dressed, contours clarified, pores extended, facial features refined, and perhaps plaster or paint applied, though the original finish is largely lost. Ancient Egyptian monuments were often brighter and more visually complete than their weathered remains suggest today. The modern Sphinx, with its muted stone and battered surface, may encourage the imagination to see it as always austere and monochrome. The original guardian may have been sharper, cleaner, and perhaps coloured in ways that made its royal and solar identity more immediate. What survives in the record suggests a monument that has lost much of its skin, not only some of its details. The work also had to manage the land around it. A carved hollow in bedrock behaves differently from an open statue on high ground. Water can gather in low places. Runoff can follow channels. Moisture and salts can move through softer limestone and weaken it over time. Ancient builders may not have foreseen every long-term conservation problem, but they would have known that the enclosure, temple floors, and surrounding cuts had to function as a physical space, not merely as a symbolic one. Later surveys have made this issue more visible, showing how drainage, sediment, and buried features around the Sphinx matter to both preservation and interpretation. No single surviving document describes the day the first cut was made, and no inscription gives the satisfaction of a construction diary, but the carved ditch, the lever sockets, the limestone layers, the temple blocks, and the unfinished or altered surfaces preserve a different kind of account. They tell of a project that was ambitious but practical, symbolic but grounded, monumental but made by hands. The Sphinx was not lowered from the heavens into Giza. It was extracted from Giza, line by line, block by block, cut by cut. And when the workers were finished, the plateau had been permanently transformed. Where there had been bedrock, there was now a lion with a king's face, and before it, a temple built from the stone that had once hidden its body. The Sphinx does not face an empty desert. It faces a ruined temple, and that temple changes the entire meaning of the monument. Without it, the Sphinx might be mistaken for a colossal image cut for display alone, a royal emblem enlarged beyond reason and left to impress anyone approaching the plateau. With the temple before it, the guardian becomes part of a ritual machine. Stone space, open court, massive walls, thresholds, light, and the eastward gaze of the lion all begin to work together. The Sphinx is not only something to be looked at, it is something that once stood within an architectural setting designed for movement, ceremony, and the careful handling of sacred power. The Sphinx Temple is badly ruined now. Its upper casing is gone, many surfaces are stripped, and its original finish can only be partly reconstructed. But the surviving core tells a great deal. It lies directly in front of the Sphinx, east of the pores, and it was built with enormous limestone blocks, many of them drawn from the very ditch cut around the monument. This means the temple is not an afterthought casually placed before an old statue. It belongs to the same quarrying logic that revealed the body. The temple is made from the Sphinx's absence. Its walls rose from the stone removed to free the lion from the plateau. That relationship gives the site an almost circular quality. The builders carve a hollow into the bedrock. They leave the central mass as a guardian. They drag the removed blocks forward and stack them into a temple facing the guardian. The stone that once enclosed the creature becomes the sacred architecture through which the creature is approached. There is something deeply Egyptian in that transformation, not waste, not accident, but reordering. The earth is cut. The body emerges. The removed rock becomes a ritual frame, and the landscape is made to speak in several directions at once. Just south of the Sphinx Temple stands Khafre's Valley Temple, more complete and severe, built from massive limestone core blocks and once finished with finer stone. Its dark, polished interior, statue spaces, and powerful geometry belong to the lower part of Khafre's pyramid complex. The proximity of these two temples is one of the great clues of the site. They are not separated by a wide distance or unrelated alignment. They stand beside one another at the same sacred threshold between valley and plateau. One is tied clearly to Khafre's pyramid complex. The other faces the Sphinx. Together, they make the lower Giza landscape feel planned rather than accidental. The Valley Temple would have served a central role in royal mortuary ritual, connecting the king's body and cult to the approach from the Nile side. From there, Khafre's causeway rises toward the pyramid and mortuary temple above. The Sphinx lies along this lower world of arrival and transformation, close to the route where the living valley yields to the desert domain of royal eternity. In this setting, the guardian's function may have been less like a statue in a plaza and more like a presence at a boundary. It watches the crossing point between cultivated life and sacred desert, between the daily world and the horizon of kings. The word horizon matters at Giza. In ancient Egyptian thought, the horizon was not only a line in the distance, it was the place where the sun appeared, disappeared, and renewed itself. The Akhet, the horizon, could be imagined as a sacred zone of emergence and transformation. Pyramids themselves could participate in this imagery, especially when seen against sunrise or sunset. The Sphinx, facing east, receives the morning light directly. Its royal face and lion body meet the sun as it rises from the valley side. And this relationship cannot have been meaningless in a civilization so attentive to solar cycles. Scholars still debate the full ritual program of the Sphinx Temple, especially because it was unfinished or stripped so heavily. But the solar character of the setting is difficult to ignore. There is also the famous visual effect seen from the Sphinx area at certain times of year, when the setting sun can appear between the pyramids of Khufu and Khafre, forming a powerful horizon image. Whether this was planned with exact astronomical intention or became meaningful through the existing arrangement remains debated. It is tempting to imagine the builders calculating every dramatic effect with modern precision, but ancient landscapes often gained meaning through a combination of design, observation, and repeated ritual experience. What survives in the record suggests that Giza's architects were highly aware of orientation and symbolic geography, even if the exact ceremony performed at every point is lost. The Sphinx Temple itself has often been discussed as a solar temple, or at least a temple with strong solar associations. Its open court and arrangement may have allowed sunlight to play an important role in the experience of the space. Recesses or statue settings in and around such temples could have held royal images, divine images, or ritual focal points, though the evidence here is incomplete. The temple's ruined condition prevents easy certainty. What can be said more safely is that it was a ceremonial building placed deliberately before a royal sphinx facing the rising sun, beside the valley temple of a 4th dynasty king at the base of a causeway leading toward his pyramid. The combination is not subtle. The architecture would once have controlled perception. A person moving through the lower complex would not have seen everything at once in the exposed way tourists do today. Walls, courts, entrances, polished surfaces, shadowed chambers, and sudden openings would have shaped the experience. The Sphinx's head may have risen beyond the temple, visible above or through the architectural frame. The body, set in its hollow, would have seemed both revealed and contained. Sunlight would have changed the appearance of the face across the day. In the morning, the guardian would receive light from the direction it faced. Later, shadows would gather differently along the enclosure walls. The monument was not frozen in one visual state. It was animated by the sun. That animation may help explain why a lion form was so powerful here. Lions in Egyptian symbolism could belong to horizons, heat, protection, and the dangerous power of the sun. A pair of lions could represent yesterday and tomorrow, the eastern and western edges of the solar path, the guarded passage through time. The Great Sphinx is a single lion, but it lies within a landscape dense with solar meaning. Its human royal face gives that solar animal force a kingly identity. It is not merely guarding a building, it is participating in the daily renewal of royal power through light. The evidence remains incomplete because the Sphinx Temple did not survive in the condition needed to reconstruct every ritual. Its casing stones are gone, its statues, if they stood in particular places, are missing or displaced. Any inscriptions that might have explained ceremonies have not survived. Even the question of whether the temple was fully finished and used exactly as intended remains open. Yet incompletion does not mean insignificance. Ancient sacred landscapes often preserve ambition as clearly as completion. A half-finished or stripped temple can still reveal a plan, a relationship, and a symbolic aim. The Sphinx Temple and Valley Temple therefore turn the Sphinx from a solitary riddle into part of an organized sacred district. The guardian faces the east. The temple receives and frames it. The Valley Temple anchors Khafre's lower complex. The causeway climbs toward the pyramid. The sun rises before the lion and sets behind the monuments of kings. Stone removed from the guardian's ditch becomes walls in front of it. The whole scene begins to feel like a carefully folded map of royal theology. Earth cut into body, body facing light, light crossing temple, temple linking king to horizon. This is why the question of who built the Sphinx cannot be separated from the question of what the Sphinx was doing. A monument this large was not carved only to fill space. It belonged to a ritual geography that made kingship visible in the land itself. If Khafre's name is missing from the Sphinx, his world is not. It surrounds the guardian in stone roots, temple cores, quarry cuts, and solar direction. The Sphinx lies there not as a detached monster of mystery, but as the watchful center of a horizon machine whose original words are lost, while its architecture still points east into the morning. Long after the 4th dynasty builders leave the plateau, long after Khafre's priests and workers disappear into the layered anonymity of Old Kingdom history, the Sphinx remains. but it does not remain as a clear monument with a clear memory attached to it. It passes into a stranger condition, still visible, still sacred, yet increasingly ancient even to the Egyptians themselves. Sand rises around it, the lower body vanishes, the pores disappear, the temple spaces before it become choked, ruined, or partly forgotten. Only the great head keeps watch above the desert, and because the head remains visible while the body is hidden, the Sphinx becomes less like a planned component of a pyramid complex, and more like a divine presence emerging from the earth. This is the beginning of its second life, when the monument is no longer only a royal creation, but an inherited mystery. By the New Kingdom, more than 1,000 years after the likely carving of the Sphinx, Giza is already a landscape of antiquity. The pyramids are not recent royal projects, they are ancestral mountains. The old pyramid cults have changed, weakened, revived, or transformed. The political and religious centre of Egypt has shifted many times, yet the Sphinx still draws attention, and later kings see in it something powerful enough to claim. This is not difficult to understand. A ruler standing before the buried guardian does not need a perfect archive to recognize authority. The monument's sheer age becomes part of its force. Its face looks back across dynasties. Its body, mostly hidden, suggests depths below the sand. Its eastern gaze still meets the sun. Even if the original intention has become blurred, the Sphinx offers later kings a way to connect themselves to a past already beyond ordinary memory. The most famous witness to this later relationship is the great granite stela set between the Sphinx's paws, commonly called the Dream Stela. It belongs to Thutmose IV, a New Kingdom pharaoh who ruled in the 15th century BC, far later than the Pyramid Age. The stela tells a royal story before he becomes king. The young prince rests near the Sphinx, which is buried up to its neck in sand. In a dream, the monument, understood as a divine form connected with the horizon and the sun, promises kingship if the prince clears the sand from around it. Whether this account records a historical event exactly, a crafted royal legend, or a blend of memory and political theology, it reveals something deeply important. The Sphinx is no longer just an Old Kingdom sculpture. It has become a divine actor in the imagination of later Egypt. The story on the stela should not be read as a simple report in the modern sense. Royal inscriptions often shape events into sacred patterns. They do not merely record what happened, they explain why a king deserves power. Thutmose IV may have had political reasons to present his kingship as divinely chosen. The Sphinx, half buried and awe-inspiring, provided the perfect witness. By clearing the monument, the king demonstrates reverence for the ancient gods and the ancient past. By receiving a promise from it, he places his rule under the authority of something older than his rivals, older than his court, older even than the living memory of Egypt. Scholars still debate how much political messaging lies beneath the dream story, but its symbolic logic is unmistakable. The buried guardian legitimizes the living king. The name attached to the Sphinx in this later period is also revealing. It is associated with Horumakhet, Horus in the horizon, and with solar forms that connect the monument to the rising sun. This does not necessarily tell us what the 4th dynasty builders called it, but it tells us what later Egyptians saw when they looked at it. They saw not merely a royal statue, but a horizon god, a presence at the place where the sun appears, the eastward orientation, the lion body, the royal face. And the ancient setting all invited this interpretation. What survives in the record suggests that the Sphinx's meaning expanded with time, absorbing layers of solar theology and royal devotion, that may not perfectly match its first purpose, but do not feel alien to it either. This later reinterpretation is not a betrayal of the original monument. It is how monuments live when they outlast their makers. The Sphinx's first audience likely understood it through the architecture of Khafre's complex, through rituals now lost, through roots, temples, offerings, and royal identity. Later, Egyptians encountered a different scene, a partly buried ancient guardian whose original administrative world had vanished. They did what human beings often do with ruins. They made the old presence meaningful again. They restored it, renamed it, surrounded it with new devotion, and allowed it to speak in the language of their own age. There is a lesser-known practical side to this sacred attention. Clearing the Sphinx was not only a gesture of piety, it was a physical struggle against the desert. Sand moves constantly at Giza, driven by wind and shaped by the enclosure itself. Once the body is buried, exposing it requires enormous labour, and keeping it exposed requires continued maintenance. The Dream Stealer's story of clearance therefore reflects a real environmental problem. The monument's hollow traps sand, its very design. Carved below the surrounding plateau surface, makes it vulnerable to burial. The Sphinx is a guardian that must itself be guarded, a monument of power that repeatedly needs human hands to rescue it from the landscape that created it. Other New Kingdom rulers also leave traces of attention at Giza. Royal activity, restoration, and devotion around the Sphinx continue in different forms. Amenhotep II has connections with the area, and later, Ramesside kings also engage with older monuments across Egypt as part of a broader pattern of restoration, reuse, and royal display. The details vary, and the evidence remains incomplete, but the general pattern is clear. The Sphinx remains valuable long after its original cultic setting changes. It becomes a stage on which later kings can perform continuity with the deep past. To repair or honour the Sphinx is to place oneself in a chain of kingship, reaching back toward the pyramid builders. This long afterlife helps explain why the Sphinx can be so difficult to interpret. It is not a monument with one clean moment of meaning preserved untouched. It is a palimpsest. 4th Dynasty quarrying and carving form the original body. New Kingdom restoration and theology add another layer. Later ancient repairs add more. Medieval and early modern stories add still more. Modern excavation and conservation create another set of changes. When the Sphinx looks at us now, it looks through all these layers at once. We may be tempted to peel them away until only the original remains, but the later layers are part of the monument's real history. The Dream Stealer also sharpens the central absence. It is the most famous inscription at the Sphinx, but it comes too late to answer the question we most want answered. It shows the Sphinx being revered, not created. It shows the monument partly buried, not newly carved. It gives later names and meanings, not a 4th Dynasty builder's record. In a sense, it proves both how important the Sphinx was and how far removed later Egyptians were from its beginning. The Stealer is a voice from antiquity, but even that voice is speaking about an older silence. By the time the sun falls over Giza in the New Kingdom imagination, the Sphinx is already both monument and memory. It is a royal guardian from a lost building age, a horizon god in a later theology, a sand-choked ruin requiring restoration, and a source of legitimacy for kings who need the past to bless the present. Its mystery grows not because Egyptians forgot it entirely, but because they remembered it in changing ways. The Sphinx survives by being reinterpreted. It keeps its body in the sand, its face in the light, and its origin just beyond reach, while later kings kneel before it, clear it, claim it, and listen for dreams beneath the desert. The Sphinx's body is a map of damage, and damage is one of the easiest things in archaeology to overread. A scar can look like a clue. A hollow can become a theory. A crack can be turned into a calendar, a prophecy, or a doorway to a vanished age. The Great Sphinx has suffered enough physical change to invite all of those temptations. Its enclosure walls are grooved and receded, its flanks are deeply weathered, its chest has been patched with masonry from different periods. The softer limestone beds have withdrawn more than the harder ones, leaving the monument with a rough, wave-like texture that seems to ask for explanation. And because the builder's inscription is missing, the weathering itself has sometimes been asked to speak where texts do not. The mainstream view places the carving of the Sphinx in the 4th dynasty, most likely in Khafre's reign, around the age of the Giza pyramid builders, but not everyone has accepted that date. The most famous challenge argues that the Sphinx and its enclosure show signs of heavy water erosion, especially rainfall runoff, and therefore must be much older than the Old Kingdom, perhaps dating back to a wetter period long before the conventional timeline of Egyptian monumental stone carving. This claim has been powerful in popular imagination because it seems to turn geology into a hidden witness. If rain carved those channels, and if heavy rain belonged to an earlier climate, then perhaps the Sphinx is not only older than Khafre, but older than dynastic Egypt itself. The idea is dramatic, but the evidence remains deeply contested. Egypt's climate was not always as dry as it is today. The Sahara has passed through greener phases, with stronger rainfall, grasslands, lakes, and human communities living in places that are now desert. That wider environmental history is real. The mistake comes when a broad truth about ancient climate is made to carry a conclusion it cannot securely support. Giza did experience changing weather, runoff, moisture, wind, sand abrasion, salt crystallization, and human alteration across thousands of years. The question is not whether water ever affected the Sphinx. It did. The question is whether the weathering proves a date far earlier than the Old Kingdom. Most Egyptologists and many geologists do not think it does. Part of the difficulty lies in the stone itself. The Sphinx is carved from limestone beds of very different quality. Softer layers erode faster, especially when exposed to moisture and salts, while harder layers resist. This can produce deep recesses and rounded profiles without requiring an unknown civilization to have carved the monument thousands of years earlier. The enclosure walls also record quarrying, exposure, repair, and local drainage conditions. Water falling on or running through the plateau does not have to belong only to a prehistoric wet age. Rare rains, ancient surface runoff, groundwater movement, and later environmental changes can all affect limestone over long periods. No single explanation fully accounts for every mark, but the existence of erosion does not automatically overturn the archaeological setting. The older age argument also has to explain the surrounding built environment. If the Sphinx were carved many thousands of years before Khafre, then the close relationship between the Sphinx, its temple, the Sphinx enclosure, Khafre's Valley Temple, and the causeway becomes much harder to interpret. Why would 4th dynasty builders create a temple directly in front of an already ancient monument, using blocks that appear to come from the very ditch around it? Why would the lower complex align so tightly with a prehistoric statue unless that statue had been deliberately incorporated into Khafre's project? Such a scenario is possible in the broadest sense. Ancient Egyptians did reuse and reinterpret older sacred places, but possibility is not evidence. The simplest reading remains that the quarrying, carving, and temple construction belong to the same Old Kingdom landscape project. This does not mean the Sphinx began from a blank, perfectly flat block of limestone. Here another idea enters, more subtle than the claim of a lost civilization. Some researchers have suggested that the original limestone outcrop may have had a natural shape before carving. Perhaps a wind-eroded landform known as a yardang. Yardangs form in deserts when wind and abrasive particles sculpt bedrock into streamlined ridges. Under certain conditions, harder material can remain as a raised crest while softer material wears away around it. In recent fluid dynamics experiments, researchers created sphinx-like forms in laboratory models by exposing uneven material to flowing currents, showing that natural erosion can produce shapes that vaguely resemble a reclining animal with a raised head. The idea is not that nature carved the royal face, paws, headdress, and temple complex. It is that nature may have offered a suggestive starting form. This is an intriguing possibility because it fits the way ancient builders often worked with landscapes rather than against them. A natural ridge near Khafre's lower complex could have inspired the final guardian. The Egyptians may have seen in the outcrop the rough potential of a lion body, then cut the enclosure, shaped the head, extended the paws, dressed the surfaces, and built the temple from the quarried blocks. If so, the Sphinx would be neither entirely imposed on the landscape nor entirely born from human imagination. It would be a collaboration between geology and kingship, with wind and limestone creating a hint, and royal sculptors turning that hint into a sacred image. But the Yardang idea must be handled carefully. It does not prove that the Sphinx is older than the Old Kingdom. It does not remove the need for human carving. It does not solve the identity of the face. And it does not replace the archaeological evidence connecting the monument to Khafre's architectural zone. What it offers is a possible origin story for the raw form, a way to imagine why that particular mass of bedrock became so important. The distinction matters. A natural outcrop can inspire a monument without being the monument. A wind-shaped ridge can suggest a body without explaining the royal head. The ancient Egyptian achievement remains the deliberate transformation of stone into symbol. The weathering debate also reveals something about modern desire. People often want the Sphinx to be older because age intensifies mystery. A monument from Khafre's time is already about 4,500 years old, already older than most cities, empires, and languages that people think of as ancient. Yet for some imaginations, that is not enough. The Sphinx must be pushed backward into a lost prehistory, into a time before writing, before dynasties, before the known rise of Egypt, because then it becomes evidence of a forgotten world. The emotional pull is understandable. The problem is that archaeology cannot be built from emotional pull. It has to follow evidence even when the evidence is less sensational. There are genuine mysteries in the Sphinx without forcing it into an unsupported age. The missing inscription is real. The exact ritual role of the Sphinx Temple remains debated. The details of construction sequence are still studied. The original finish, colour, and full symbolic program are partly lost. The balance of wind, water, salt, burial, restoration, and human damage in shaping the present surface is complex. The face's precise identity remains less certain than many would like. These are not small mysteries. They are enough. They keep the Sphinx alive as a problem without requiring the monument to become a relic of an unknown civilization. A more grounded view may actually be more fascinating than the extreme one. The Sphinx stands at a point where natural geology, royal ideology, skilled labour, later restoration, climate, and modern interpretation all meet. Its body records the weakness of limestone beds. Its enclosure records quarrying and weathering. Its temples record an architectural program. Its later inscriptions record reinterpretation. Its damaged face records both ancient identity and historical loss. The stone has not been affected by one simple force. It has been shaped and reshaped by a long chain of forces, some intentional, some accidental, some human, some environmental. So the weathering does not close the mystery, and it does not overthrow the strongest evidence. It deepens the story by showing that the Sphinx is not a frozen object from one day in the 4th dynasty. It is a carved monument living inside a changing landscape. Rain touched it, wind cut at it, sand buried it, salts cracked it, human hands repaired it. Later, kings revered it. Modern researchers scanned and measured it. Popular writers turned its scars into arguments. The old guardian endured all of this, and its surface became a battlefield between geology and imagination. This safest conclusion is also the most patient one. The Sphinx may have used a natural form, and it certainly has been transformed by natural processes. But the monument known to history is a human-made Old Kingdom royal guardian, most coherently understood within the Khafre landscape, even while some of its scars continue to resist a final explanation. The longer a monument remains silent, the louder later imaginations become around it. The Great Sphinx is almost designed to attract speculation, a colossal face without a surviving builder's inscription. A lion body carved into a hollow, weathered walls that seem older than memory, ruined temples nearby, and a landscape already filled with pyramids whose internal passages encourage thoughts of hidden spaces. It is one of the few monuments on Earth where a viewer can stand in full daylight, surrounded by mapped archaeology, and still feel that something enormous has not quite been explained. That feeling is real. The danger begins when the feeling is mistaken for evidence. The most persistent popular theories usually begin with a simple dissatisfaction. The Old Kingdom answer feels too ordinary for a monument so strange. Khafre, quarrying, temples, limestone layers, causeways, and royal solar symbolism can sound almost too practical, too administrative, too human. A buried guardian with a broken face seems to ask for a deeper story. So the Sphinx is pulled backward into prehistory, attached to Atlantis, linked to lost master builders, or treated as the last visible marker of a vanished civilization that supposedly existed before dynastic Egypt. These ideas offer drama, and drama has its own kind of gravity. But what survives in the record does not support them as history. Atlantis-style claims depend on a gap between wonder and documentation, because the Sphinx lacks a clear original inscription. Some writers imagine that the silence is not ordinary loss but deliberate concealment, a sign that the monument belongs to a forgotten age whose records were destroyed or hidden. The problem is that a missing inscription cannot do that much work. Absence alone does not prove an earlier civilization. If it did, every damaged or unlabeled monument in the ancient world would become evidence for a lost empire. Archaeology cannot treat mystery as a blank check. It has to ask whether the surrounding stone, tools, settlements, pottery, architecture, quarry marks, and environmental evidence point in the same direction. At Giza, those surrounding clues point overwhelmingly to the 4th dynasty world, not to an unknown civilization thousands of years earlier. There is also the matter of technology. Some fringe versions of the Sphinx story assume that the monument is too impressive for Old Kingdom Egyptians to have carved with known tools. This argument is often made with confidence, but it underestimates ancient Egyptian skill and overestimates the mystery of the work. The Sphinx was not carved from granite. It was shaped from local limestone, some of it soft enough to be worked with copper tools, stone pounders, wooden levers, and organized labor. That does not make the task easy, it makes the task believable. The Egyptians of the 4th dynasty were already quarrying, moving, and setting enormous stones in pyramid complexes. The Sphinx is extraordinary, but it belongs to a society demonstrably capable of extraordinary stone projects. Hidden chamber theories are more complicated, because the question of voids beneath or around ancient monuments is not automatically foolish. Limestone landscapes can contain fissures, cavities, natural solution features, old cuts, blocked passages, and construction gaps. Archaeologists and geophysicists have every reason to investigate subsurface anomalies carefully. The mistake comes when every radar signal or irregularity becomes a secret library, a royal tunnel, or a sealed archive from a lost age. Ground-penetrating radar and other remote sensing tools do not show hidden cities in simple picture form. They produce patterns that require interpretation, testing, and often excavation. An anomaly is not a chamber. A chamber is not a library. A library is not evidence of Atlantis. Each step requires proof, and popular speculation usually leaps over all of them at once. The idea of a secret hall of records beneath the Sphinx has become especially famous in modern esoteric writing. It imagines a concealed archive preserving ancient wisdom, perhaps from a destroyed civilization, waiting beneath the pores or nearby bedrock. The appeal is obvious. The Sphinx, already a guardian, becomes literally a guardian of lost knowledge. But the archaeological evidence for such a chamber has never matched the power of the story. Surveys have found features worth studying, and the subsurface around the Sphinx is complex, but no confirmed ancient archive has been discovered beneath it. Scholars still debate some features of the bedrock and the meaning of certain anomalies, but there is no reliable evidence for a hidden library under the monument. This is where modern technology creates both clarity and confusion. Tools like 3D mapping, photogrammetry, laser scanning, radar, and magnetometry have transformed the study of ancient sites. They can reveal buried walls, floor levels, voids, moisture movement, structural weaknesses, and construction relationships invisible from the surface. Around the Sphinx, modern projects have helped document deterioration, map masonry, study the temples, and investigate what lies below or beside the visible stone. This is valuable work, yet the same tools can be misrepresented easily. A technical image with coloured zones and shadowy shapes can look more certain to the public than it really is. Data becomes a screen for desire. Recent excitement over a supposed second Sphinx at Giza shows the pattern clearly. Claims circulated that remote sensing or radar-like analysis had detected another buried Sphinx or vast underground structure near the pyramids. The story spread because it was perfectly shaped for the modern imagination familiar monument. Hidden twin, ancient secret, official silence, sudden revelation. But there has been no confirmed archaeological discovery of a second Sphinx. No excavation has exposed such a monument, no peer-reviewed study has established it, and no responsible authority has announced it as fact. Experts have warned that the claims rest on over-interpretation of indirect data. The proper response is not to mock curiosity, but to slow it down. Remote signals can suggest where to investigate. They cannot by themselves create a monument under the ground. There is a similar caution around theories that use the Sphinx as a calendar for catastrophic events. Lost astronomical knowledge, or precessional alignments reaching deep into the Ice Age. Ancient Egyptians were attentive to the sky, and astronomical orientation mattered in royal and sacred architecture. That part is real, but it does not follow that every alignment proposed by modern writers was intended by the builders. or that the Sphinx encodes a date far earlier than the archaeological record allows. The sky is full of patterns, and human beings are very good at finding meaning after the fact. Without supporting evidence from construction context, inscriptions, material culture, and site sequence, an alignment remains a possibility at best, not a historical conclusion. The more careful story is less explosive but more durable. The Sphinx does not need Atlantis to be mysterious. It does not need a second buried twin to matter. It does not need an underground library to hold lost knowledge. It already holds knowledge in the way its body was cut from the plateau, in the way its temple blocks match the quarry around it, in the way later kings reinterpreted it, in the way erosion and repair record thousands of years of exposure, burial, and rescue. The real mystery is not that the Sphinx belongs to some vanished super-civilization. The real mystery is that a known ancient civilization, working with human tools and royal imagination, created something so powerful that later ages keep trying to make it even stranger than it is. That temptation will probably never disappear. The Sphinx is too famous, too damaged, too silent, and too visually commanding to be left entirely to cautious explanation. Rumour will continue to gather around its pores like sand in the enclosure. Some rumours will vanish quickly. Others will return in new forms whenever a scan, shadow, or satellite image offers a shape that can be made to look like a secret. But the Guardian remains patient. It does not confirm the fantasies, and it does not surrender all its uncertainties. It stands between the two, reminding anyone willing to look carefully that the boundary between mystery and invention is as important as the mystery itself. The Sphinx has survived, but survival should not be confused with stillness. Its body is a history of damage and repair, and that history begins earlier than many people imagine. The monument did not remain pristine for thousands of years before modern pollution, tourism, and excavation began to threaten it. It was already vulnerable from the moment it was carved into a hollow of uneven limestone. Its lower body was made from weaker beds than the head, and those beds responded badly to exposure, moisture, salt, wind, and time. The same geological layers that allowed the builders to shape a colossal lion from the plateau also ensured that the lion would age unevenly. In this sense, the Sphinx was born magnificent and fragile at the same time. The head endured best because it was carved from harder stone, standing high above the enclosure and often above the sand. The body suffered a more complicated fate. When buried, parts of it were shielded from direct wind abrasion, but burial brought other problems. Sand can protect, but it can also hold moisture, trap salts, and hide decay until it becomes severe. When exposed, the body could be attacked by wind, temperature changes, rainfall runoff, and human touch. The Sphinx's long biography is therefore not a simple story of burial saving it or exposure destroying it. Both conditions helped and harmed it in different ways. No single explanation fully accounts for every scar. Ancient Egyptians understood that the Sphinx needed care. Later restorers added masonry to weakened areas, especially along the body, pores, and lower surfaces. Some of these repairs may date back to the New Kingdom, when the monument was cleared and reinterpreted as a powerful horizon deity. Other repairs belong to later periods, each one leaving its own style of blockwork, mortar, and intention. The result is that the modern Sphinx is not a purely 4th dynasty surface. It is a composite creature original bedrock core, ancient patching, later ancient restoration, modern repairs, and conservation decisions layered over one another. The Guardian's body is not only carved stone, it is a record of people repeatedly refusing to let it collapse back into ruin. This layered repair history creates difficulty for researchers. A viewer may look at a block on the chest or flank and assume it belongs to the original design, when it may be a restoration from centuries or millennia later. Another surface may look natural but preserve an ancient cut. Another area may be so altered by repair that the original profile is hard to reconstruct. Archaeologists and conservators have to distinguish bedrock from patch stone, original carving from later stabilization, ancient intervention from modern intervention. The evidence remains incomplete in places because many earlier repairs were not documented to modern standards. Some well-intended work may have hidden older clues while saving the monument from further loss. The paws show this especially clearly. They are among the most visually important parts of the Sphinx today, stretching forward with ceremonial force, framing the space where the dream stela stands. Yet much of their visible form has been repaired. The original stone had suffered badly, and restorers over time rebuilt and reinforced areas to preserve the shape. This does not make the paws false, it makes them historical. They are the surviving idea of the paws maintained through successive acts of care. The same is true of other parts of the monument. The Sphinx is authentic, not because every visible surface is untouched, but because the monument has carried its identity through damage, repair, and reinterpretation. Wind has always been one of its enemies, though perhaps not always in the simple way people imagine. Sand-laden wind can abrade limestone, especially where surfaces are exposed and already weakened. But the most dramatic decay in many areas comes from the interaction of stone quality, moisture, and salt. Salts can crystallize inside pores and cracks, expanding and breaking the stone from within. Water may come from rare rain, humidity, groundwater movement, or changes in the local environment. When the monument is exposed after long burial, these processes can accelerate in unpredictable ways. The Sphinx is not just being worn down from the outside. In places, it has been weakened from within. Modern Cairo's growth has added another layer of pressure. The Giza Plateau is no longer an isolated desert edge with only fields and floodplain below. The modern city presses near it, bringing changes in groundwater, air quality, vibration, drainage, and visitor pressure. Tourism gives the monument global visibility and political importance, but it also increases the burden of preservation. Every famous ancient site must live with this contradiction. The world cares because it can see the monument, but seeing the monument creates new forms of risk. The Sphinx is guarded now not only from sand, but from the consequences of fame. Conservation has not always been perfect. Earlier modern restorations sometimes use materials or methods that later specialists questioned. Some repairs may have trapped moisture or failed to match the behavior of the original limestone. In a monument this old, even care can become part of the problem if the wrong stone, mortar, or technique is used. Later conservation efforts have had to study not only ancient damage but earlier attempts to fix that damage. This is one of the lesser-known realities of preserving the Sphinx. Modern experts are often conserving the ancient monument and correcting the history of conservation at the same time. Careful documentation has therefore become essential. Projects have mapped the masonry, photographed surfaces, studied geological layers, recorded repair phases, and examined how water moves through and around the enclosure. Archives from past conservation and archaeological work are valuable because they preserve observations that may no longer be visible in the same way. A stone replaced, a wall patched, a trench cleared, or a surface cleaned can change the evidence. The best modern work treats the Sphinx not as a frozen object to be made attractive for visitors, but as a complex, vulnerable system whose history must be recorded before any intervention changes it. Even the enclosure matters for survival. because the Sphinx lies below the surrounding plateau level. It can collect sand, water, debris, and environmental stress. Its hollow is part of its identity, but also part of its danger. Drainage questions are not minor technical concerns. They affect how salts move, how stone weakens, and how future repairs should be planned. Modern surveys around the Sphinx and its temples have increasingly focused on the ground beneath and around the visible monument, because preservation depends on understanding the hidden conditions as much as the visible cracks. The Sphinx's survival is often described as if it were a miracle of ancient strength, and in one sense it is. But it is also the result of repeated human attention. Old Kingdom sculptors gave it form. Later Egyptians cleared and restored it. Medieval and early modern observers kept its memory alive in changing ways. Modern archaeologists and conservators exposed, mapped, reinforced, debated, and sometimes struggled with it. Each age inherited damage from the previous one and added decisions of its own. The monument we see today is not the untouched guardian Khafre's world may have known. It is the guardian that endured because generation after generation found it too powerful to abandon. That makes its weathered body more moving, not less. The missing nose, patched paws, scarred chest, receding flanks, and broken beard are not merely losses. They are evidence of time made visible. The Sphinx has not defeated time. Nothing does. It has negotiated with time, stone by stone, repair by repair, burial by burial. Its survival is therefore not a simple victory, but a long compromise between collapse and memory, and as the desert light moves across its damaged body. The ancient guardian seems to carry not only the authority of the king who may have ordered it carved, but the labour of everyone who tried, across centuries, to keep that king's lion from vanishing into dust. To ask what the Sphinx meant is to step beyond the simpler question of who carved it, because authorship and meaning are related but not identical. A king may order a monument, architects may design it, workers may cut it from stone, priests may use it in ritual, later rulers may rename it, and centuries may change what people believe they are seeing. The Sphinx stands at the meeting point of all those layers. It is a royal image, a solar symbol, a threshold guardian, a political statement, and a sacred presence. But none of those meanings cancels the others. Ancient Egyptian monuments often worked by accumulation. Their power came from the ability to hold several truths in one form. The most immediate meaning is kingship. The human head wears royal dress, and the body's scale belongs to royal ambition. In Old Kingdom Egypt, the king is not simply a ruler who governs land, commands labour, and receives tribute. He is the living centre of order, the mediator between gods and people, the one whose eternal transformation matters to the stability of the cosmos. A monument with a royal human face and a lion's body makes that idea visible. The king is human enough to be recognized, divine enough to be magnified, and powerful enough to take on the body of one of the most commanding animals known to Egyptian imagination. The Sphinx does not show kingship as gentle administration. It shows kingship as controlled force. The lion matters because it brings the desert and the sun into the image. Lions lived at the edges of human space, in regions where settlement gave way to wilderness. They were admired and feared, associated with heat, danger, speed, and power. In Egyptian symbolic language, lions could guard horizons, protect sacred places, and embody fierce solar energy. A lion with the head of a king lying at the edge of a pyramid complex is therefore not a decorative hybrid. It is a royal body made cosmic. The king does not merely possess power, He becomes power organized into form. The wild animal is not loose in the world. It is calm, watchful, and aligned with sacred architecture. That calm is essential. The Sphinx is not attacking. It is not roaring. It does not rear up in motion. It lies in the pose of a guardian who does not need to prove strength by movement. The paws extend forward, the chest rises, and the face looks east. This stillness is one of the reasons the monument feels so unnerving. A moving beast belongs to a moment. A motionless beast belongs to eternity. This Sphinx presents force without haste, authority without explanation, surveillance without visible effort. What survives in the record suggests that this was part of its original effect, a presence that holds the threshold rather than crossing it. The threshold itself is another layer of meaning. The Sphinx stands near the lower approach to Khafre's pyramid landscape, close to the transition between valley and plateau, between the cultivated world of the Nile and the desert world of royal eternity. In Egyptian thought, boundaries are powerful places. Temples mark boundaries between ordinary space and divine space. Tombs mark boundaries between life and afterlife. Horizons mark the boundary between visible world and cosmic renewal. The Sphinx occupies such a boundary in stone. It watches the place where one realm begins to give way to another. In that position, it may have functioned less like a statue to be admired and more like a sacred force controlling passage. The eastward gaze deepens this role. The monument faces the rising sun, and later Egyptians explicitly understood it through horizon and solar imagery. Even if some later meanings developed after its first carving, the orientation itself was present from the beginning. Each morning, light approached the face before moving across the body and temples. The guardian did not need to move through the solar cycle. The cycle moved across it. At dawn, the king lion received renewal from the same sun that structured Egyptian time, agriculture, ritual, and royal theology. Scholars still debate the full ceremonial program of the Sphinx Temple, but the combination of eastward orientation, royal face, lion body, and horizon setting makes a solar dimension difficult to avoid. The Sphinx may also have worked politically, especially in the landscape inherited from Khufu. Khafre's pyramid is immense, but it stands in conversation with the Great Pyramid nearby, a monument already so overwhelming that any successor had to answer it. By carving a colossal guardian at the lower end of his complex, Khafre's builders may have added a new kind of royal claim to Giza. The pyramid announces the king's eternal transformation through height and mass. The Sphinx announces the king's presence through embodied watchfulness. It is not a mountain of stone but a living form made enormous. Together, pyramid and Sphinx create two expressions of royal permanence, one abstract, geometric, and celestial, the other animal, human and territorial. There is a subtle difference between a statue of a king and a Sphinx form of a king. A standing or seated king can be approached as an image of office. A Sphinx is more liminal. It suggests a being between categories, not fully human, not merely animal, not simply divine, but capable of touching all three. That in-between quality is likely part of its strength. The Sphinx belongs to a culture that did not always separate natural and supernatural forces the way modern thinking does. Animals could carry divine power. Landscapes could contain sacred presence. A king could be represented through forms that expanded him beyond ordinary human appearance. The hybrid body is not a puzzle for its own sake. It is a solution to a symbolic problem: how to show a king as more than a man without making him disappear into abstraction. The monument's location in a carved hollow may have intensified this meaning. Because the Sphinx rises from the bedrock rather than standing on a built platform, it seems less installed than revealed. Its body belongs to the earth. The quarry trench around it lowers the viewer into a space where the guardian dominates without needing height like a pyramid. The effect is not simply vertical awe, but enclosure. One comes down into the presence of the lion. The temple in front shapes the approach, and the surrounding stone walls make the Sphinx feel rooted inside its own sacred cut in the plateau. No single explanation fully accounts for every aspect of the design, but the physical experience suggests intentional drama. Later Egyptian interpretations, especially the association with Horus in the horizon, show how naturally the monument could be absorbed into solar theology. The Sphinx became a divine presence that could appear in dreams, promise kingship, and demand restoration. This later sacred identity may not be identical to the 4th Dynasty program, but it reveals what the monument was capable of becoming. It had enough symbolic openness to survive changes in religion and kingship. A monument that means only one narrow thing may die when its context dies. The Sphinx endured because its image was broad enough to be renewed. Its meaning, then, was never locked into one sentence, which may be why the missing inscription feels both frustrating and strangely appropriate. A label would help modern history, but it might reduce the monument's ancient power to a builder's name. The Sphinx worked through presence, orientation, animal force, royal face, temple space, and horizon light. It did not need to explain itself to be understood by those trained to read its world. To them, the king lion at the edge of the desert may have said without words that royal power guarded the sacred passage, that the sun renewed the king, that the plateau itself had yielded a living emblem of order, and that beyond the noise of human life stood a force calm enough to last for ages. The mystery endures because the Sphinx offers enough evidence to resist fantasy, but not enough evidence to end desire. It stands in the rare and uncomfortable middle ground where archaeology can say a great deal, and yet the most emotionally satisfying answer remains absent. The case for Khafre is strong because the monument belongs so tightly to the lower Giza landscape, the causeway, the valley temple, the Sphinx Temple, the quarry trench, the matching limestone blocks, the royal symbolism, and the solar orientation all point in the same direction, but the original inscription is missing. The first name is gone, the builders did not leave, or time did not preserve, the one plain sentence that would quiet the argument. That silence keeps the guardian alive as a question. In many ancient mysteries, the difficulty comes from too little evidence. With the Sphinx, the difficulty is stranger. There is a great deal of evidence, but it is uneven evidence. It is architectural, geological, damaged, repaired, buried, exposed, reinterpreted, and sometimes displaced. A temple wall can tell one part of the story. A weathered limestone bed can tell another. A later stela can reveal reverence but not origin. A causeway can imply planning but not speak a name. A statue face can suggest a king but not prove identity beyond all doubt. The evidence remains incomplete not because nothing survives, but because what survives belongs to different kinds of time. This is why the Sphinx has become a mirror for changing methods of investigation. Early visitors saw a colossal head rising from sand and interpreted it through awe, rumour, and the limited knowledge of their age. Early excavators cleared more of the body and began to treat the monument as an object that could be measured, compared, and placed within Egyptian chronology. 20th century archaeology brought more careful mapping, geological study, conservation analysis, and attention to the quarry-temple relationship. More recent work has added digital recording, remote sensing, ground-penetrating radar, 3D documentation, and open archives that allow researchers to revisit earlier observations with new questions. The Sphinx has not changed in the way a living creature changes, but the tools brought to it have changed dramatically. Modern technology has a double effect. It can make the monument less mysterious by revealing physical relationships that the eye alone might miss. It can show how blocks in the Sphinx Temple relate to the ditch around the monument, how repairs differ from original stone, how buried walls or subsurface features may be arranged, how water moves through the area, and how vulnerable sections of the limestone body may be deteriorating. At the same time, technology can make the monument seem more mysterious to the public because scans and radar images rarely speak plainly. They produce anomalies, reflections, patterns, shadows, and probabilities. To a trained specialist, an anomaly is a reason for caution. To the imagination, it can become a hidden chamber before anyone has dug a single trench. This tension has become especially important in the age of viral discoveries. A technical claim can travel around the world long before it has passed through careful archaeological testing. A subsurface irregularity becomes a tunnel. A radar pattern becomes a temple. A speculative interpretation becomes a headline. Around the Sphinx, where the public already expects secrets, even modest survey results can be inflated into revelations. That does not mean the surveys are unimportant. Quite the opposite. Ground-penetrating radar, mapping, and conservation studies are among the best ways to understand what lies around and beneath the visible monument without harming it. But they must be treated as beginnings of investigation, not final answers. The recent attention given to underground features near the Sphinx and Sphinx Temple shows how delicate this balance is. Studies of areas connected with drainage, buried stone, and subsurface structures can help explain how the site was built, how water once moved through or around it, and how ancient or later features may lie beneath modern surfaces. Such work is valuable precisely because the Sphinx is both archaeological monument and endangered stone body. Understanding the ground is part of understanding the statue, but careful language matters. A radar result may suggest a built feature, a void, a support structure, or a natural irregularity. It does not automatically reveal a secret city, a hidden archive, or proof of a second guardian waiting underground. The rumour of a second Sphinx is a perfect example of how the mystery renews itself. The idea is irresistible. If one Sphinx has watched Giza for thousands of years, perhaps another lies buried nearby, its face still hidden, its body still sealed beneath sand and stone. It is a story with the shape of a discovery before discovery has happened. Yet no confirmed second Sphinx has been excavated at Giza. No peer-reviewed archaeological evidence has established such a monument. Claims built from indirect readings of remote sensing data remain unproven until they are tested by careful fieldwork. The responsible position is not to reject every buried feature in advance, but to refuse to turn uncertainty into fact. This is the same discipline needed with older age claims, hidden chambers, and alternate builders. The Sphinx deserves curiosity, but curiosity must move slowly when the evidence is fragile. It is easy to use the absence of a builder's inscription as permission to believe almost anything. But the absence of one kind of evidence does not erase the presence of other evidence. The stone still has context. The temples still stand where they stand. The causeway still passes where it passes. The quarry trench still surrounds the body. The geological relationship between cut bedrock and temple block still matters. Mystery does not mean freedom from evidence. It means evidence that has not finished speaking. The Sphinx also endures as a mystery because it is visually unresolved. The face is damaged enough to prevent certainty, but intact enough to feel personal. The body is animal but geological. The head is royal but anonymous. The paws are restored but powerful. The enclosure is both sacred space and quarry scar. Every view seems to offer a different interpretation. From the front, the guardian appears calm and almost symmetrical. From the side, the proportions become strange. From above, the relationship to the temples and causeway becomes clearer. From close range, the surface dissolves into cracks, repair blocks, and limestone beds. The monument never settles into one simple identity. That visual instability helps explain why it keeps attracting new questions. A pyramid can be overwhelming, but it is also abstract. Its shape is mathematical, monumental, and distant from the body. The Sphinx has eyes, mouth, shoulders, paws, and a damaged face that seems to have lost something specific. People respond to faces. They look for intention, personality, pain, age, and memory. The missing nose becomes a wound. The eroded eyes become a gaze. The small head becomes a clue. The lion body becomes a riddle. The Sphinx invites emotional interpretation before the mind has time to become cautious. And yet the most powerful mystery may be the simplest one. The Sphinx was made by people who lived in a world we can partly reconstruct but never fully enter. They understood its rituals, its names, its colours, its ceremonies, and its place in royal theology in ways that are now lost. Archaeology can recover the setting, date the likely period, map the stones, compare symbols, and test claims. It can bring the guardian closer to history and farther from fantasy, but it cannot restore the full experience of standing before the newly carved lion in Khafre's age, when the temples were sharper, the surfaces cleaner, the rituals alive, and the meaning still obvious to those who served it. That lost immediacy is what the Sphinx guards most deeply. Not a secret chamber, not a vanished super-civilization, but the vanished certainty of the people who once knew exactly why it was there. The Great Sphinx now belongs to a world far larger than the one that carved it. It appears on postcards, documentaries, textbooks, airport murals, souvenirs, conspiracy websites, scholarly reports, satellite images, restoration archives, and countless photographs taken by visitors who stand before it for a few minutes and try to carry away something of its age. A monument once bound to one royal landscape has become a global symbol of ancient mystery. Yet the more widely it is seen, the easier it becomes to forget that the Sphinx is not an idea first. It is stone. It is limestone cut from a particular ridge at Giza, weathered by a particular climate, repaired by particular hands, and surrounded by particular temples whose broken blocks still matter more than any legend built around them. That's why the modern Sphinx is such a powerful mirror. People come to it wanting revelation, but it gives them method. It teaches that the past rarely survives in the form curiosity prefers. It does not hand over a neat confession. It offers context, damage, silence, and relationships. It asks investigators to compare limestone beds, study temple foundations, map ancient cuts, examine old repairs, and separate later stories from earlier evidence. The Sphinx is famous because it looks like a riddle, but it is important because it shows how real historical knowledge is built when the obvious answer is missing. The work is slower than myth. It is also more durable. Modern archaeology has not stripped the Sphinx of mystery. It has changed the quality of the mystery. The question is no longer whether ancient Egyptians were capable of carving it. They were. It is no longer necessary to imagine lost machines, vanished master races, or secret civilizations in order to explain the Guardian's existence. The deeper mystery is how the Fourth Dynasty imagined kingship so completely that it could fuse a human royal face, a lion body, solar geography, temple architecture, quarrying, and sacred landscape into a single form. That is not a lesser mystery, it is a more human one, and therefore more haunting. The likely answer, built from stone rather than inscription, points to Khafre's world. The Sphinx lies where Khafre's lower complex demands attention. The causeway, valley temple, Sphinx Temple, quarry trench, and matching limestone blocks create a pattern too coherent to dismiss lightly. Yet the missing original text keeps the answer from becoming perfectly closed. The Guardian remains just beyond complete possession. It belongs to history, but not entirely to certainty. Scholars still debate details, alternative proposals still appear, and modern surveys continue to refine the ground beneath and around it. The evidence remains incomplete, but incompleteness is not failure. It is the normal condition of studying deep time. What survives in the record suggests that the Sphinx's first meaning was not loneliness, but connection. It connected bedrock to temple, king to lion, sun to horizon, valley to pyramid, life to afterlife, and human authority to a force larger than the human body. Later ages changed those connections. New Kingdom kings saw a divine guardian buried in sand. Medieval observers saw wonder and danger. Modern scholars see quarrying sequences and conservation problems. Tourists see the face of ancient Egypt. Popular imagination sees hidden doors. Each age finds itself in the Sphinx because the monument is old enough, damaged enough, and silent enough to receive many projections. But the Sphinx is not empty. That is the difference between a true mystery and a blank fantasy. Its stone has limits, its landscape has structure, its temples create context, its damage has causes, even when those causes are complex. Its silence does not mean every story is equally likely. The old Guardian permits wonder, but it also demands discipline. It invites people to ask who built it, then quietly teaches them that the best answer may not come from a name at all. It may come from the shape of a quarry, the path of a causeway, the direction of sunrise, the grain of limestone, the reuse of blocks, and the stubborn survival of architecture after language has failed. The Sphinx also reminds us that monuments do not preserve intention perfectly. Even stone forgets, paint disappears, inscriptions fall, temples are stripped, repairs cover older surfaces, sand buries context, later devotion rewrites meaning, modern exposure creates new dangers. The past is not a sealed chamber waiting to be opened in perfect condition. It is a damaged inheritance, and every generation that studies it must decide how much to restore, how much to question, and how much uncertainty to leave honestly in place. So the ancient guardian of Giza remains both answer and question. It is almost certainly a royal monument of the Old Kingdom, most coherently tied to Khafre's pyramid landscape. It is also a survivor whose original words are lost, whose face is damaged, whose body has been rebuilt in places, and whose meaning has been renewed by every age that found it half buried or fully exposed beneath the Egyptian sky. Its greatest secret may not be that nobody knows anything. Its greatest secret may be that we know so much, and still the stone keeps one step ahead of us. As evening settles over the plateau, the Sphinx changes again. The hard daylight softens. The scarred body grows quiet in shadow. The pyramids behind it darken into shapes older than memory. The face no longer looks like a puzzle to be solved quickly, but like something that has watched many solutions rise and fall. It has seen kings vanish, languages change, temples collapse, sand return, scholars argue, cameras flash, and rumours flare briefly before fading. Through all of it, the Guardian remains in its hollow, made of the plateau, facing the horizon, holding the space between what Egypt wrote, what time erased, and what stone still remembers. And perhaps that is the calmest way to leave it, not as a solved object, and not as an unsolved fantasy, but as a survivor at the edge of knowledge. The Great Sphinx does not need to become older than civilization to feel ancient. It does not need a hidden twin beneath the ground to feel strange. It does not need a secret chamber filled with lost books to hold memory. Its mystery is already there, in the fact that human beings once looked at a limestone ridge and saw a guardian waiting inside it. They cut into the plateau. They removed stone. They shaped a lion's body, gave it a royal face, and placed it before the rising sun. They built temples from the rock around it. They understood meanings that now reach us only in fragments. Then time began its own work. Sand climbed the body, wind softened the edges, water found weaknesses. Later kings cleared and honoured it. Later hands repaired it. Later minds renamed it. The Sphinx passed from royal monument to sacred relic, from buried wonder to archaeological problem, from Egyptian guardian to symbol of the ancient world. What remains is not perfect, but perfection is rarely what survives. What remains is stronger than perfection, a damaged form still powerful enough to make people stop, look, and wonder. The broken nose, the patched paws, the worn face, the scarred body, and the ruined temples do not lessen the monument's presence. They deepen it. They show that even the most ambitious works of kings must pass through weather, neglect, rediscovery, care, and misunderstanding. In the end, the Sphinx asks for patience. It asks us to listen to stone before rumour, to landscape before legend, to evidence before desire, and still, after all the careful arguments have been made, it leaves room for awe. Beneath the fading light of Giza, the old lion does not answer in words. It simply faces the horizon, as it has done for thousands of years, while the desert grows quiet around it and the last gold of the sun slips across the ancient face.